bird walk?
What was that, Artist?
Oh, I just asked about the next virtual bird walk, but that's
Oh,
on
that is on the 19th, and it's Angry Birds.
Wednesday.
Okay. So tonight, our speaker is Dr. Daniel Lewis. Dan is the Dibner Senior Curator for the History of Science and Technology at the Huntington, where he's responsible for the science and technology holdings from 1800 to the present. He has two postdoctoral appointments at Oxford University, the Smithsonian, and the Rachel Carson Center for Environmental and Society in Munich. He has a faculty appointment at Caltech where he teaches upper division courses on environmental history and humanities. He's an avid birder. He's got at least four, but I believe his fifth book is coming out. Some of his book titles include A Book Older Than God, The Great Basin Bristlecone Pine, um, First Light, and Counting Extinction, Saving the Birds, Collections of a Feather. So there's a lot of titles out there that you should look up. And tonight we're going to be hearing about de-extinction. Dan, all yours.
Thank you, Donna. That's so nice. I'll say a little bit about some of the things I've done because they're very birdy. And I wanted to talk about de-extinction, but I didn't want to leave the birds out of it because they really fly through most of my books and they also play a central role in some of my books. So one of the things I oversee here at the Huntington are all of the natural history works here, including our double elephant folio set of Audubon's Birds of America. And you can see just over my it's my left shoulder, but maybe it looks like my right shoulder in the screen, Podiceps cristatus, the crested grebe, out of Audubon's double elephant folio, chromolithographic edition, which is very rare. And so I'm reminded every day of my friend here over the corner of over my shoulder. Um, it's fun to talk about extinction, believe it or not. And I want to sort of try to weave together a little bit about Hawaiian birds because I've written a book about them called Belonging on an Island: Birds, Extinction and Evolution in Hawaii. And I also want to talk about this book that I've got in process, this book about extinction. And one of the chapters has a central focus of Hawaiian birds. I was born and raised in Hawaii, and so and Hawaii is often called the extinction capital of the world. And so this book is something of a love letter to my my native state. Um, I became interested in birds when I was driving north up to the Arctic, across the Arctic Circle to go for a swim at Prudhoe Bay with my martial arts instructor. Rick, I don't know if I ever told you this story, but we stopped at a gas station, and it had one of those sort of rusty paperback carousels, and sitting in the carousel was the second edition of the National Geographic Field Guide to the Birds of North America. And I picked it up, and I sort of idly opened it up, and I don't know if I've ever had a moment like this any other time in my life, but the world really kind of came crashing in when I realized, oh my gosh, I can sort of makes sort of some sense of the natural, messy, tumbling nature of the natural world, and through the kind of fact that there's an organization of these things, there's a schema, there's a taxonomic matters. And I've gone on to oversee what is one of the world's great collections on the history of evolution here at the Huntington. We have the third largest collection of Darwin's works. We have many other works, and so that was really my entrance into the world of birds. And I'm probably going to do something tonight that I don't usually do, which is to read actually from a fair amount from some of the text. I think this is only the second talk I've given on my forthcoming book, which is called Lost, A Biocultural History of Evolution, of Extinction. I don't love the title because there was a very popular TV show by
Really?
that same name. So I asked my editor at Live Right, which is a Norton imprint. It's their only imprint to come up with a better title. So I'm still waiting on pins and needles to hear back from her about the draft I submitted in January, and it really has been great fun. I'd like to do a screen share if I could, if I can do this competently. Hold on a second here. What I want to do is a portion of my screen so I can look at let's see what happens when I try to do this here. Hold on, hold everything. Of course, it's off the screen, so I can't move it very easily here. Yes, I can. Okay. Hold on. Let me get this sorted here real quickly here. Stop that. I'm also, the class I just finished teaching at Caltech last night was a class on birds. It's called Birds, Evolution, Speciation, and Society,
Mm.
which is very sciencey sounding and very appropriate for a Caltech audience. And it was great fun. And so I actually had the kids come to the Huntington to look at some of our works by John Gould and Audubon and other these sort of birdie book treasures. So it was a lot of fun.
Mm.
Can you guys see that okay? My
Yes.
share? Okay. So you can see I've sort of worn my heart on my sleeve right away in talking about de-extinction, and I'm curious if any of you have particular opinions about the topic because it's something of a loaded gun in some ways, and I have a lot to say about it. So first of all, how much time do I have? Someone give me a point at which you're going to get the shepherd's crook out and pull me off stage. What do you want? Half an hour or 40 minutes? Or you tell me what, or longer? Tell me what
40
you.
minutes or so, and then let people ask some questions.
Okay, that's perfect. Okay, so Um, the natural world is manifestly irregular and odd in more ways than we can count. Yet we have desires to strong arm it into even more aberrant forms through human intervention. In the 21st century, we've taken up efforts at de-extinction or resurrection biology, as it's also known. The topic has become a thicket of biological triumph, scorn, ethical concerns, bravado, and conservation anxiety. But it's not a new idea. The best known rendering of animation from Life Thought Gone is Mary Shelley's 1818 fictional book Frankenstein or the Modern Prometheus. Her book expanded on a late night talk with fellow writers at Lake Geneva, along with a waking dream she had about a man brought back to life, stitched together from parts. In Greek myth, Prometheus was a titan who stole fire from the gods and gave it to humans. This gift gave humans power and knowledge, but Prometheus was punished eternally for his defiance. So that's really kind of sets the stage for what I have to say. And as I said, I've sort of threaded birdie notions. And so given that opening, I want to say a couple things about some other things. So I this was a book I wrote in 2012 called The Feathery Tribe about the study of birds in the 19th century. And extinction has hovered through all of these topics. And of course, some of the birds at Ridgway was interested in have gone long extinct, but he was really the great towering systematist and taxonomist in the 19th century and really laid essential groundwork for the study of birds forever after. So I have a Jones about Ridgway and his work. This was the one I published in 2018. David Sibley gave me a nice little squib, which pleased me very much. But it also got me thinking more thoroughly, I guess, about extinction and its many registers. And so I've had this topic on the brain for a long time. This new book about extinction that I'm working on, I've pressure tested it for a while, and I'd be curious for your opinions because I've still got some time to retrench some of this, but there are four parts to it. So, um, curiosity, sorrow, eradication, and resurrection. And each of those four sections has its own particular shape. There are three chapters for each of the sections. And, so the fourth section is this resurrection notion. And there are a lot of ways that extinct species can live on even after their passing. Museum specimens, old photographs, rare books, ancient correspondence, frozen seeds and tissues, other tools and strategies have provided us with new information about lost plants and animals. We've also discovered species once thought extinct. So I have a chapter on that, so-called Lazarus species, because they've having risen from the dead. Sometimes we're known only from the fossil record. Mm. And these rediscoveries give us a kind of a reprieve. Um, it really kind of recrafts the calculus of decline, I suppose I might say. And um, so, so de-extinction receives the attention of the last chapter of the section, and I've developed strong opinions about this. In my Caltech class, I often will take a survey about students' thoughts about de-extinction, and I'll say, how many of you think it's a good idea? Without any sort of preamble, I'll say, how many of you think it's a good idea? And how many of you think it's a bad idea? And at the start, almost everybody raises their hand to say that it's a good idea, and then by the end of the class, nobody raises their hand to think it's a good idea. So they've clearly drank my Kool-Aid, but I hope it's because I've laid out a case for it that talks about why it's not a good idea. And so, um, our technological cleverness, as I say, a mighty force has been outstripped by an even mightier quality, our hubris. It's a lot of work all around. And so um, that's really the tack I've taken in that book. But I want to talk about a Hawaiian bird and its potential future. Anyone recognize this bird? Oh, it says on the drawing. And have you been birding in Hawaii? It's the best because not only do you get the endemic species that have survived, and they're different on different islands often, but you also get the introduced species that have been brought in from other parts of the world in a mad rush in the 1930s through the 1960s. Um, there was a group called the Hui Manu, which was a group of white, highly mostly women, who introduced species by the dozens, consisting of thousands of individuals, and some of them stuck. And so what that means is you get birds like the Brazilian cardinal, the red-vented bulbul, the saffron finch, and then this really beautiful red-billed leothrix, which is a gorgeous little bird. And I've spent a lot of time interrogating the effects of these introduced species on the ecology of these islands, and it's suffice to say it's variable. Um, so this notion of extinction has weaved its way through my works. This was the book I wrote that Donna mentioned. It came out last year. Ari Shapiro had me on All Things Considered the day it came out, which was terrifying with an audience of 12 million people. But it was great fun. It's out that's the European edition. A very talented artist who's a very important bird artist, a guy named Eric Nyquist, who's done work you've no doubt seen on covers of other books or in illustrations. Um, it came out in Chinese and Italian a few months ago, so there are a couple of translations of it. The title Donna mentioned is actually the title of the first chapter, A Book Older Than God, about the bristlecone pine and its survival. But I'm going to meander quite a bit here. So this is Eric's work here, and you can see some of the things he's done on the front page of the New York Times Book Review, and so on. But he has these sort of bespoke illustrations for each of the chapters. Um, and the last chapter really was a bird story, and it's the most personal chapter of this book. It's about Ceiba pentandra, the largest tree on the South American continent. And a good friend of mine is a biogeochemical engineer in Denver, and he said, "I'm getting married. I'm gonna have a bachelor party. I'd like to lead a trip down to South America with six of my best friends and look for harpy eagle nests, because who doesn't do that on their bachelor party?" So off we went, and this is the story of that trip, and that's me somewhere in the middle of the boat there. We all had hats on, um, and so it was great fun. And these are some of the shots we got. We only saw chicks. We found two nests, one which had probably never been visited by, at least by a white person before. But the little bird I want to talk about and then find a way to stitch it into this sort of de-extinction narrative, and is this bird that I showed you, that pencil sketch up by Doug Pratt, called the Kauai o'o on Moho bricatus. Just to give you a sense of my birdie obsessions, both my kids have bird middle names. So my son Paxton J, and then my other son is Kelso Palila, the Palila being a Hawaiian honey creeper, Loxioides balui. And so uh, just to say, and so one of the things that I find really interesting about the notion of extinction, especially when it comes to birds, is why naturalists commented so constantly on the fact that they were disappearing, but they didn't seem to either care that it was happening, um, or that they didn't understand what was at stake. And you can see that first quote by Alfred Newton to R.C.L. Perkins, about how people just don't understand when something's disappearing that it is actually going to be gone. And so, but here's the thing: they didn't have the tools to understand it, or really to prevent it. And so they didn't have things like systematic surveys or proper censusing techniques to count individual birds, or to try to translocate them, or God forbid, to try to execute a captive breeding program. They just had no idea. So, ecology was really only on the horizon as a science. And so this modern de-extinction impulse, I think, stems directly from these kinds of claims, we didn't know that something was going extinct, or we didn't care, and we didn't know what to do if we did care. And so I think the notion of sorrow plays a really significant role here because it seems to me that the de-extinction impulse sort of papers over these extinctions, call them our missteps or products of our era. And all these de-extinction people make a claim that we have an obligation to these species and to humanity precisely because they went extinct on our watch. So, um, uh, this is John Sincock, who was the person who rediscovered the Kauai o'o. He was quite a character. He wore his shirt open to his navel. Usually, he had a gold chain around his neck with a little albatross carving at the end of it. But he was the one that really instigated um, the modern field survey, I guess, through something called the Hawaii Forest Bird Survey. Um, and in writing this book, the o'o went extinct in 1987, and a great deal was written and said about it. But the person in the course of my archival research, I discovered that one of the participants was a filmmaker who lived here in LA, and he shot a bunch of footage of the o'o, supposedly, according to the book, but it was nowhere to be found. So he's still alive. I called him. I said, "Hey, can you look around and see if you have this footage?" And he said, "Sure, I think I've got it somewhere." So he found some footage. He sent it to me, and I had it digitized at substantial expense. And when I looked at the digitized film, it was a cocktail party in Honolulu. Not that helpful. So I wrote back and I said, "You know what? Could you try again?" I, I was determined to be persistent about it. He said, "Oh, sure." And he sent me this. Like, how did you miss that the first time around? And sure enough, it was footage that had never been seen or was known about the o'o because it had never been published in any form. So I sent it off to the Cornell lab for ornithology, and they have a digitized version of it with his permission, of digitized version of the print of the film that has no sound. So this takes us forward to the question of a question that people ask about a lot of species, and in particular about a lot of bird species. What do we do to make something come back from the dead, as it were? How do we de-extinct something? It's not easy. And part of the problem is you really can't bring something back. Here's the gist of the matter, folks. You can't bring something back without living tissue, okay? All you can do is make some educated guesses about the bird. And so what you'd have to do to sequence, so the Kauai o'o, Moho bricatus, the DNA has never been sequenced. Um, You'd have to catalog every specimen across natural history collections worldwide, skin, skeletal material, tissue, very importantly, tissue samples, especially ones that might have been frozen when the last birds died in 1980s. I don't think they've ever frozen any of the tissues from these birds. They've just made study skins of them. And then you'd have to do a lot of low damage methods to kind of assess which specimens are most promising. You'd have to do X-ray fluorescence to make sure there was no arsenic contamination from old preservatives. And then you'd have to do some destructive sampling. And for birds, what they do when they do DNA testing on birds is they take tissue off the skin pads of the foot of the bird. It's a promising spot to get tissue from. And then you have to do a lot of DNA sequencing across multiple specimens and generate an enormous amount of raw data. And and then you need a reference. You need some sort of reference. You need the closest available relative. For this bird, it's probably one of the waxwings or a silky flycatcher. And then you end up with a draft genome full of gaps, sort of low confidence regions in your strand of DNA. And you might be able to fill in some of those gaps. But ultimately, you'd have nothing that was really that usable, given the specimen ages and the histories of their storage, right? And the core problem is that DNA degrades over time, can never really recover it completely. Don't believe Jurassic Park. Um, and so the other thing is, and this is the thing that applies to all of these de-extincted species, supposedly, is that you lose the behavior and the culture of an animal. So, if you're a cognitively complex animal like a bird, a lot of their behaviors learned socially, right? And so, if you're going to reconstruct a passenger pigeon or the thylacine or the Carolina parakeet, you'd have to, they'd have no, let's just say you could create one somehow magically with damaged DNA. They'd have no colleagues, as it were, to learn from, and they'd have no ecological context that would have shaped its original sort of repertoire of behaviors, right? And so what de-extinction really actually produces is a proxy. It's a functional analog. They might look like the extinct species, and as we go along with these processes, they might resemble them more and more. They might even fill in a similar, ecological role, but they're really genuinely new organisms that are shaped by the genetics of living relatives. And so, have any of you heard of Colossal Biosciences? So they're the company that had, I'll have a picture of it in a minute. They had the cover of Time magazine showing, let me go to it here, showing this. So this it says extinct. This is Remus. He's a dire wolf, the first to exist in over 10,000 years. Endangered species could be changed forever. That is a lie. That is not a dire wolf. As a friend of mine said, that is a gray wolf that's had some work done. That is nothing like the original. They inserted 20 different um, DNA strands. So they're not really gray wolves, but they're not dire wolves. They're not precisely gray wolves. They've been genetically altered in 20 specific ways to express features the dire wolf probably had. So larger body size, wider head, bigger jaws and teeth, a pale coat color, and so on. And so, but these 20 edits are just a drop in the wolf's genetic bucket. And it's clear that the new wolves are not what a lot of so-called resurrection biologists would like them to be. And I spoke to the author of this piece and about his experience, and he went on a little press junket to see the wolves at an undisclosed location. He said they were in the northern tier of the United States, is how he described it to me. And he got within about 10 yards of them. There was supposed to be a protective enclosure. There wasn't. And he said it was sort of terrifying. And these pups were probably about 150 pounds, and they were only a few months old. And so, and the agreement that with Colossus Biosciences is that there would be a fence between them at all times, but they were just let into the enclosure. And so, it really, this is another aspect of de-extinction that people have a hard time holding on to. Just because they are creations doesn't mean they're under our sway in any meaningful way. And that's Beth Shapiro at the left, who's their chief scientist. She wrote a book called How to Clone a Mammoth a few years ago. It was very popular. Um, and one of the things that she is engaged with is pursuing the de-extinction of the dodo, which disappeared, sometime after, I think, 1662 is when it was last seen. Mm, um, and this is typical language. And she says the dodo is a prime example of a species that became extinct because we, people, made it impossible for them to survive in their native habitat. I'm thrilled to collaborate with Colossal and the people of Mauritius, which is the island the dodo was from, on the de-extinction and eventual rewilding of the dodo, and so on. So they view this as not just a moral good, but a moral imperative, a way for humans, as I said, who've driven so many species to the brink of extinction or over it, to sort of get square with nature. And the Time magazine piece quotes her saying, if we want a future that is both bionumerous and filled with people, we should be giving ourselves the opportunity to see what our big brains can do to reverse some of the bad things we've done to the world already. So we cycle back, in a way to the Kauai from here, and we attach our sense of remorse to to that loss, and to a future where what we've created really is a hybrid, not a living, breathing bird itself. And so, um, this is this is Ben Lamb, and Ben is the CEO of Colossus. He's a multi-billionaire who's run a bunch of startups successfully, and it was so hard to get a hold of him, but I finally got through many layers of administrators so that we could have a talk. And Um, and so we have great disagreements about this, and he's not going to be very happy with the things I have to say about de-extinction. I've decided what really I want to do is have a pretty sharp critique of this whole thing. So, you know, there's so many complications to these matters. I'm going to read a little bit from my book text. So, what are these creations? They're a new form of life, and if these animals were to be set loose in the wilderness, they will interact with their environments in ways we cannot possibly predict. It's a form of artificial selection, harking back to Darwin's experiments with pigeon breeding, which he made famous in his opening chapter of his 1859 book on the origin of species. Darwin carefully winds up his natural selection pitch by talking about how humans have been modifying pigeons for centuries. It was sort of underhanded softball instead of major league fastball. And Darwin was really doing his damnedest to disarm his readership with the most basic, irrefutable, examples about pressures that could change living things. And he certainly understood that human hands had modified forms for millennia. Domesticated dogs are just a single species, Canis familiaris. And so humans can change animals very quickly by constraining organisms into new circumstances. And of course, plant breeders do the same thing. They cross-pollinate to produce forms that range from rose hybrids, which we do here at the Huntington, to modern corn, all of it through artificial selection. But here's the difference. So resurrection biology in its current and probably its future form involves much more powerful tools, which makes it a difference in not just of degree, but of kind. And they really are a far cry from the relatively gentle levers of artificial selection that Darwin was pulling in his efforts to demonstrate that humans could modify the natural world. And so all sorts of ethical issues are stacked upon each other. And the complications really begin to boggle. So, but here's also the problem: is the barn door really has been flung wide open for this notion of de-extinction. And no matter how carefully we proceed, these hybridized creations will issue for us whether we want them or not. We have no institutionalized ethics committees to regulate the work. There are no regulatory bodies assessing the quality or utility of these creations. And there's big money involved, which is why there's no particular form of regulation. There are billions and billions of dollars of outside investments. I think that gave the money because it's not clear how exactly might monetize creating these organisms, and these de-extinction companies operate in a very gray and unregulated world. And they're at the moment, at least any of these animals that are created only, excuse me, are subject only to kind of standard animal welfare laws, the same rules that like govern a zoo or a research laboratory, and all 50 states in the US have animal cruelty laws. They vary in their strength and their scope. And so we need a new category, beyond the existing ones for wildlife or livestock or research animals. Defining a new category would be a start. We might call it a synthetic species or a revived species. You'd have to have tailored regulation, very clear designation of responsibility for their creation, their ecology, their ethics. Also, what would we call them? Like, who works up the science? Normally, when you discover a new animal, the discoverer gets priority in naming it, in creating the scientific name for it, right? Well, how does that work for an animal that's been de-extincted? And what is it? It isn't really a new species, it's a hybrid. So you'd have to call it, and it gets into wonky territory, but you'd have to give it a trinomial name, probably, because you'd have to first get people to agree in the scientific community that it was say, a new bird, and not a hybrid, right? So when I talked to Ben Lamb, he took very vigorous exception to my using the word hybrids to describe their work. He said the hybrid language is not helpful. It undermines the research and validity of the work our scientists are doing. Instead, it focuses on semantic breakdowns that are meant to delegitimize our work. We're bringing back species that can fulfill an ecological role and support broken ecosystems. That is de-extinction. His own staff uses the term. I found a video of one of his staff members, a guy named Ben Novak. He says we can't even recreate the true passenger pigeon. We'd have to create really more of a hybrid animal. He says so, and other members of his staff use the same terms about what is really being produced, And so one of my arguments is that, well, let me show you this book, show you this bird here. So anyone know what this is? The one in the middle is the bird in question. You might have had no reason to see this. This was just a few years ago. It came out on the news. So this hybrid bird in the middle was identified in a suburb of San Antonio, and it's the result of a mating between a male blue jay on the left and a female green jay on the right, and it was it was probably dubbed a grue jay. Um, but we can draw some useful understandings about from hybrids that occur in the natural world without the sort of tinkering hand of humans. And we study a wide range of hybrids, that include things like humans with missing parts or extra parts or other modifications from our existing body plan for humans, if you could call it that. And so this Grue jay was really kind of an extraordinary pairing. They're not even in the same genus, and I looked this up. Their most recent common ancestor lived at least 7 million years ago. And so they caught the male bird in the nest. They took blood samples. They banded him and turned him loose. And he's still seen occasionally in the area. This was in 2023, and it's able to feed itself. And whether it'll produce breed and produce offspring is kind of an intriguing question. And it's almost certainly a one-off. And life in the wilderness for birds is brutal and short, so it might be gone soon. But of course. But there are many complications. So humans, in a way, did play a role in their creation, as it turns out, although it's a pretty diffused one. So, um, the blue jay, as you may know, is a temperate species. So it's native to eastern and central North America and all the way up into southern Canada. But the green jay is a tropical species, usually found in southern Texas, down into parts of northern South America. So it gets pretty far down there. And so the fact that our human warmed climate it really meant that their ranges began to overlap at some point in the recent past. And so, without this climate change, these two different species probably would never have encountered each other in the first place. And of course, there are others. There are other hybrids that are been found in the capacious natural world. There's the grizzlies and polar bears have mated, and so they're pizzly bears, as they call them. Mm. And there are lots of other examples as well. One of the things that I find really interesting is the International Union for Conservation of Nature is the group that ranks birds from least concern to extinct. And they range, see if I can remember them all. Least concern, vulnerable, endangered, threatened, endangered, critically endangered, extinct in the wild, and extinct. And I'm actually a commissioner for the bird red list for the IUCN. I'm on the Species Survival Commission. And so it's very telling to see what they have to say about these de-extincted animals, because clearly they're ahead of the curve. Nearly 10 years ago, they came up with a little document that gave some guiding principles about what to do and how to think about de-extinction. And they describe de-extinction as creating proxies of extinct species, which is a useful way to think about the subject. Their focus is on the potential for the creation of what they term as ecological replacements for extinct species to yield conservation benefits while minimizing the likelihood of negative impacts on current conservation efforts or existing species or the environment or on local livelihoods. So they note that the term de-extinction is misleading. And so the linguistic terms are fascinating. They say proxy is preferred to facsimile, the document notes, which implies creation of an exact copy. So they've understood for some time that we're not creating facsimiles, and people hop right over that. And so the woolly mammoth, for instance, is one of the target species that's gotten a lot of press. And the notion is that if you can reproduce an animal like the woolly mammoth, they can contribute to sort of the ecological resurrection of tundra in Siberia and other places where you need animals to sort of trample the permafrost and generate plant life because it can come through the permafrost, which has been, rumpled up and so on. And so the extinction really is a red herring in a lot of ways. And so let me show you my closing paragraph for the de-extinction chapter here. I won't read it to you because that always annoys when people read out loud something that's on a slide in front of them. But um, so if you think about how hybrids work, all the pieces are in place for a hybrid to survive and continue to reproduce. It's got sort of sociocultural tools. It's got genetics that aren't relocated from another organism. They're natural beings, and in some ways, my argument, one of the imperfections of my argument, at least one of the implications, is it harks back to a much older idea from earlier centuries about don't tinker with the natural world. And of course, all the tinkering we've done has been beneficial in many ways. We've modified corn hybrids to be much more durable and provide a rich food source for people and so on. So there are many other examples, but I think in the case of de-extinction, I think it's really important not to think of them as something restored, but rather something revised. And I think it's going to be a fascinating seat at the table in the coming years to see what happens. And it's a and it's oh, that's all I have to say. I think it's going to be a fascinating thing, and I think um, hopefully there are enough things in place that provide strictures against the things that could go wrong. Because you can imagine so many things. I can imagine so many things that could go wrong. Because what happens when you return an organism to an environment which it hasn't lived in for 100 or 200 or 500 or 1,000 years? You get an invasive species. It's a novel organism in a particular area that had no business being there, I suppose. And so, to my mind, that's one of the biggest threats. Is in all those other issues aside, the fakery of de-extinction and its parts, you're really returning something that is trying to survive in an environment it hasn't ever been in. It's never been in. It's been a degraded environment or a place where there's habitat fragmentation. So I think that's one of the biggest concerns is, you know, and we have no way to control what will become an overriding pest once that happens. If something somehow can have an advantage over other things that have adapted to a particular environment, then we're faced with a confounding problem. And one of the more fascinating notions of the IUCN's report is well, we need to have something about the possibility of euthanasia. What a way to kill off these species we've introduced if something goes wrong. Well, also good luck with that. If something starts breeding, viciously, as it were, and you got an old problem made new all over again. So that's what I have to say about the topic of de-extinction, and I hope my Kauai bird example, as a demonstration way of the difficulties of even establishing the most basic foundational things. We don't even have a genome for certain animals. There are many other ethical issues. I'm glad to talk about any of them with you. So fire away if you've got questions.
I actually have a couple questions. I just got back from England, and last week in the papers they were talking about outlawing the breeding of dogs and other animals to have shorter legs, better looking faces, and all of those other things because it's in some way harmful for the animals and the people. So I don't know how far they're going to get with that. But generally, I've always been under the impression that this whole science of trying to bring back and de-extinct animals is nothing more than just the beginning of people trying to clone a child or clone a lost family member and bring back dad.
Well, you're right about that. I mean, one of the truisms I think about de-extinction is it's not a very long distance from that to eugenics. The sort of improvement of the breed, and you can see the fact that they can tweak. I talk about this elsewhere in the chapter, but but it's what if you want to make a bird have a more mellifluous song? Okay, why not? What if you want to give it greater defense against a particular predator that is always able to overtake it? So the fact that you can sort of do this biological tinkering won't necessarily be limited to people to instances where they just want to reproduce it. The temptation to tinker with is going to be way too great for people to avoid doing that. So, why don't we make you can imagine, let's not have a bird with a syrinx is when you have two vocal cords, which is why birds can make two sounds at once. Why not give it three larynxes? I mean, the possibilities, you can just see the darkness emerging about this. And so there is a sort of eugenics echo to all this, which is, you know, in a different kind of way, getting rid of negative characteristics, so-called negative characteristics, and then sort of adding in so-called beneficial ones. And you think about, like, even now you can choose with fairly high, actually, you can choose the sex of your child now if you're so inclined to fork over the money involved with the reproductive technologies that are used for what's called ART, assisted reproductive technology. So, yes, so I'm glad so some of these dogs have been so inbred they can't breathe. If you look I have a friend who's got a pug. No, it's a French bulldog. And this thing can barely get air in and out of its lungs. It's kind of horrifying. And so fascinating. I hadn't heard about that. That's fascinating.
Well, pugs and bulldogs are on the list.
Yeah, that's yeah, it's not good.
And again, with recreating, it seems that the only thing people really want to do is get something that looks the same.
Yeah, that's right. That really seems to be the objective. And I think a lot of the talk about putting them in a landscape where they can provide ecological services is just hogwash. I think it's just window dressing, and it's a way to let them get to where they really want to. They pretend that's their reason, but of course their real reason is they just want the thrill of seeing something. It's just about hubris, something that no one's seen before that they get to see. But the truth is, they won't be the same. In the same way that those dire wolf pups aren't dire wolves, they're just gray wolves with some modifications. And so I often say they're like a facsimile, is what they're like, right? They're an imperfect copy. And I've spent a lot of time doing exhibits, library exhibits here at the Huntington, and I've often said nobody would come to an exhibit that was a facsimile of something. Like no one's going to walk up to a case in my History of Science show and go, "Oh my God, look, this is a facsimile of Isaac Newton's copy of the Principia with his own handwriting in it." No one's going to. So that there's a verisimilitude people want, but that they'll never get, I think, out of these creatures.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You could
Benny.
probably give them all yellow-thighed finches and make them happy.
Yeah, there you go.
But isn't
So
it
my
all
my
related to the technique that they use in order to create these?
Ardith, I can barely hear you.
Okay, I'll give up. I can't. Or I'll type it.
Sorry, you could type it into the chat if you want.
my,
For now, Benny, why don't you go ahead?
my concern whenever I've heard about these things is, all right, the environment that supported the passenger pigeon does not exist anymore.
That's correct.
The environment that supported the dodo does not exist anymore. So
Right.
what are we doing? I mean, it's just I feel like it's again hubris, but crazy thinking too. Like, look what I can create, Frankenstein. Yeah, no, thank
Yeah.
you.
Yes.
And it's the same sort of thinking that brought starlings here.
Yeah. I mean, on the one hand, you can imagine a scenario where they can multiply and take over place. You could also imagine the opposite scenario, which is where they're confronted with the same difficulties that caused them to go extinct in the first place. So if you were able to recreate the Kauai, let's say you could reproduce that or any of the other honey creepers or honey eaters in Hawaii, they'd still be subject to avian malaria, avian pox, habitat fragmentation, all the same things that brought them down in the first place.
Right, right.
That's also a difficulty is who wants to bring back a species only to see it go extinct a second time, right? You know, and I didn't mention one of the other concerns that people have with this, which is the possibility that people will sort of jettison conservation for particular species because if they think they can just spin it back up again, no one's going to spend dollars on preservation for an endangered species if we feel confident we've got the wherewithal to bring one back again. It's like, why would you bother spending money protecting current species, you just let them go extinct and bring them back, you know. So you can see all sorts of sort of complications with that idea.
This is a bit of a tangent, but you sort of mentioned this at the end of your right before you stuck the landing, as you had promised, which you did. Um, has there ever been a case where a species has been intentionally brought to extinction?
You know, the only one, so I teach a history of extinction class at Caltech, so this kind of thing comes up quite a bit. Smallpox is really the only example that I know of that's been brought, and in fact, it hasn't truly been eradicated because there are several test tubes of smallpox, the smallpox virus, in Russia, and there are a few at the Centers for Disease Control in the U.S. But that's the closest we've come. We've tried very hard to eradicate smallpox. I have a whole section on eradications in the book, and so mosquitoes, rats. I have a lot of things to say about our attempts to manage species that we either find unhelpful or that we actually downright detest. So there, that is in a way the other side of the coin, things we've tried to get rid of. But it's very difficult. I'll just say it's very difficult to get rid of an established species unless it's severely threatened in the first place. And if it was severely threatened in the first place, you wouldn't have much of an inclination to try to get rid of it because it's about to be finished off anyway. So for things that are super ubiquitous, like the Anopheles mosquitoes or you know parasite carrying rats or other things, there's just no way, you know, despite efforts we've made for hundreds of years to get rid of those, or at least control them, it's not going to happen, you know. So, but smallpox is the only one I know of that we've actually intentionally and quite successfully eradicated.
Hmm. And I guess my other point, which is a complete non sequitur, Jeffrey
Yeah.
Kluger, who wrote that Time magazine cover story,
Yeah.
he his son is one of my best friends. Like it was a nice surprise to see him. He did write a terrific book called Simple Justice about Brown versus Board of Ed, which I totally recommend.
Oh, really?
But
Well,
I know this
one of the
story at
things
Time
I
magazine
asked
got a
him,
lot of
Brian,
flack. Pardon?
you're cutting in and out. You're
Oh.
cutting in and out. Um,
Oh, I was just going to say that he did write a book called "Simple Justice" about the story of Brown versus Board of Ed, which I think it won the Pulitzer Prize, and it's a terrific book. But I know his story in Time Magazine got a lot of flack.
well, he's writing a new book on de-extinction, a whole book on it. And one of my questions to him was, where do you land on this de-extinction story? There's this long pause, and he said, well, I don't really want to say it because, you know, the book is still in process and I've talked to Ben Lamb. And so I knew from that answer exactly what his attitude was, which is it's not going to be a positive one. It's not going to be a positive take on de-extinction because he wasn't willing to tell me what his opinion was about it. So he's a good writer. He's an interesting guy. We had a long conversation just once, but we had a long chat about this whole topic. And he was careful because he didn't want to, you know, he's working on this new book and he didn't really want to sort of get out in front of his project because my book will probably be out before his book is out. So
Did Arthur C. Clarke ever change his mind about extinction? I I remember reading, yeah,
yeah,
I don't care if they go extinct or not because we'll bring them back eventually.
that's a good question. I've heard that before. I don't know. I'm going to make a note to find. I don't know, but I'll find out. Um, yeah, I mean, you know, this has been. I mean, really, as I said, this has been around since Mary Shelley wrote Frankenstein, you know, in 1818. You know, it's been this sort of Promethean notion that we can find a way to revive inanimate objects. And you know, we used to do things like experiments on when electricity really became functional in the 18th century. We started running currents through dead tissue, dead animals, and including dead humans, and they'd sort of come to life, you know, and that in a way was the genesis for Frankenstein. But it's only because the action of electricity on muscles makes them contract and expand. So it looks like they're animated, but of course they're still dead. But I don't have to find out about Arthur C. Clarke, Sanford. That's a good question.
The other thing is, I know out in Colorado they were serving in restaurants a lot of beefalo. The hybrids worked out extremely well. The meat tastes pretty good. As far as I know, they're still breeding them.
Yeah.
They are, but they're very hard to contain because you have to put up very secure fencing, not like you would with regular beef cattle.
Yeah. Have you studied turduncan?
Turducken.
Second.
That's funny.
I
You
mean,
know,
buffalo, bison are evolved from Asiatic cows that came over the Bering Strait. So
uh-huh.
at least
Uh-huh.
they're relatively closely related. So I could see why, like a cow and a donkey, they they'd be able to interbreed.
I mean, there is a school of thought that says really the way to solve caring for these invasive species is to eat them, and find a way to make them palatable. And there's a term for it. I have it in the book somewhere. I can't think of the term. It's like invasivores. I think that might be it. Let me see if that's right. People that eat invasive species. Invasivores. Let's see if I remember that rightly. No, I don't know. It's something like that. You know, I mean, the idea being some of these things, we can both feed people and sort of eliminate some of these so-called unproductive species, then we're better off.
Apparently, the lionfish is fairly tasty.
Exactly, and there's all sorts of recipes for lionfish. I don't know how you catch it, but
You know how you catch them and get all those poisonous
I
spines off
think
of them.
that's the problem. Is it's hard to prepare to eat. I think, but yeah, there's a whole.
We'll
There are
have to
probably
hybridize
cookbooks.
them.
There you go. Well, there you go. They hybridize them so they're no, so they're more edible. You know, and so that's the thing. People have done that with many species of fish. They've modified them so they're better eaten. You know, and so it just we've been tinkering for a long time. You know,
Well, I mean, look at all. Can you hear me now? Can you
yeah,
hear
loud and
Yes,
clear.
Okay, I switched computers. I mean, we've been doing that with cattle for ages. I mean, there are lots of different breeds. We've been doing it with chickens.
Right.
We've done it with turkeys.
right. But that's not going in and adjusting the genetics with the idea of
Right.
creating things that can't be
Right. We're not
not that
sticking
can't be
into
created
any
by just selective breeding.
breeding.
Crossbreed.
Yeah.
Well, that was my question before, actually, and rather than try and type that in, it seems to me that there's no real way to take original DNA and create something out of it. It has to be mixed with something that's already viable and
Yeah.
then incubated by a surrogate.
That's
Is
right. I
that
mean,
true?
we've had, yes. So the dire wolves were birthed by some giant dog that they use. I mean, you have to have some surrogate to give birth to it,
You
but
can't develop it in a petri dish, is the
you
point.
can't, you
But
cannot. But
but
so
as could you do it with humans? Because I know I have a collection of cigarettes that have been smoked by very famous people that are no longer alive. And in the back of my mind, I'm hoping someday that I could bring
that
Jerry Garcia back to
that
life.
is
I have
absolutely
I have Tony Curtis, Dean Martin, Jerry Garcia. I mean, I have probably like a dozen like household names.
DNA all over their
But
cigarette.
would that be possible since they are humans and you could, sort of work between the DNA and with
Um,
it's still a
I gave this sort of long litany about what it would take to have usable DNA, and it'd be awfully hard from like someone's lipstick or from their couple of little bits of saliva on a cigarette butt. But I mean, animal cloning's been around since 1996. Remember Dolly the sheep?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that was created from the somatic cell of another adult sheep. And then the first domestic, this is really funny. The first domestic animal was cloned in 2001. It was a pet, someone's pet cat was reproduced. And of course, this led to the inevitable nickname of copycat for this new feline. But
Well,
one of the
how
things
close was the personality to the original?
good question. I'm not read, but they
Was
did this, but it was very different looking. That's the thing is epigenetics refers a term that refers to all the things that are kind of outside genetics. And so cloned animals can have different coats and different color patterns. And of course, that was the thing that they discovered that when the original cat was named Rainbow because it had all this dazzling array of kind of orange and black and white. Well, copycat was, black. So cloning's not like a cookie cutter proposition. If you want to bring back Fido after he's died, or while he's even still alive, you're going to get a very different looking dog. So, and cloning is not it's not easy. Like sometimes the animals are too large, they have organ defects, there are difficulties with their immune systems, And it's hard on the surrogate that has to carry these. Like, what's going to give birth to a woolly mammoth, which is much bigger than the biggest elephants that we have, or a Colombian mammoth, which is even bigger. But it does translate the whole genome from one individual to another. So, and so that's what didn't happen with the dire wolves.
Yeah.
It'll just craft its own agenda through its biology. That's what'll happen.
I
When I
wanted to make one comment about hybridization.
Sure.
On Midway, the Laysan albatross
Hmm.
periodically will interbreed with the black-footed because they nest
Uh-huh.
next to each other.
Uh-huh.
And what's interesting about that is that the hybrids do a mixed courtship dance,
Yeah.
and they don't attract a mate because they don't have the correct dance for either one of them.
Yeah. I've heard about that. And there are other species where that's the same. They'll have a different song, for instance,
Right.
because for some birds, songs are acquired culturally. They're learned from their parents. But in other cases, some aspects of bird song and bird call are not. And so, that's natural selection at work again. Something's going to die off if it can't function normally and reproduce and carry on its line, it's going to die off. So, but the hybrids that have succeeded over long periods of time have been ones that can. So, it really is really a crapshoot in some ways. What hybrids chances are once they've been put it into the world.
Read
Dan,
the chat.
for,
That's kind of interesting right now.
What's that?
There's
Yeah.
some
Going
interesting
into the chat to see what
chat about
comments.
Oh, let me look at the
Cats.
chat. I've got it. Let me rejigger my. Sorry, I've got to find my chat now.
You can
Okay.
stop sharing if you want to. It'll be
Oh yeah,
easier
thank you.
probably.
That's what I'll do. Thank you. Let me find my.
Do you want me to read it to you or
No, hold on. Let me just become. I do this so often, but of course now my poor students like Professor Lewis. Here's what you got to do. It's good having students that
Usually up
can't
at the
type.
top somewhere that says
Oh, for
stop.
God's sakes. Oh, no, I see. It's on my other monitor. Here we go. I see. All right, there we go. Stop share. Got it. Okay. Let's see the chat. Okay. You need mitochondrial DNA, yeah, which is hard to recover. Yeah, cat colors are because of random disabling of genes. So yeah, I mean, I have another history of science colleague here, and he has twins. They're fraternal twins. One's like almost a foot taller than the other one now. He's big. He's a really big kid. The other one's a really little kid. But yeah, Thomas, I'm looking at your comments here about mitochondria. Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
When they do the cloning, are the changes considered epigenetic, or is it another way to say genetic?
I think cloning is genetic, and epigenesis really are all the factors that aren't. Let me look in I talk about this so that
Epigenetic can happen anytime in your life. So
Right.
it's not just at during the embryo form. You can
Yeah, but
right.
epigenetic you don't necessarily maintain through offspring.
yeah.
Well,
But
actually, that's actually there is thoughts that some of the epigenetic changes are passed along.
yeah, there is. But there are changes in gene expression that occur. The DNA sequence doesn't get altered with epigenetics, and it's a study of that. Those changes in gene expression that occur without changing the DNA sequence. Um, yeah. So, yeah, I'm not a geneticist.
But epigenetics is a hot new topic in genetics
Yeah,
and understanding how those things happen because it's not just your DNA. There's a lot more going on,
for
and
sure.
because there's
For
not
sure.
that many genes that control our bodies. There's got to
Right.
be more going on.
Right.
They were
Yeah.
talking about using CRISPR and then finding that a few generations later the change went away.
Uh-huh. Yeah. I mean, I mean, one of the things that's happening is that there's a new frontier for all this biology, and a lot of this has been pushed forward by Colossus Biosciences. They've got this team of a guy named George Church, who's really a leading geneticist, working on some of these problems. But at least at the moment, you can't reproduce something without live tissue because once cell death occurs, all the things that are necessary to further life, don't exist anymore. So you have to have a living, um, organism of some kind. Uh, at least at the moment. At least at the moment.
So where
Sorry.
is this DNA actually introduced? Is it introduced into an egg in a petri dish like IVF, and then that's introduced to the surrogate? How do they actually do it?
So it's complicated. What they do is they take spliced sections of DNA and they can insert them using CRISPR and a couple other kinds of technologies as well. And they can insert the DNA into the existing, and you need to have an ovum, you need to have an egg
Right.
to do that. So what they've done is you okay, J.K. Mac? I saw a flurry of
There was an
activity,
attack.
like a bee was after you or something. As I understand it, and if any of you know better than me, tell me. But I think what they do is they take these spliced, they identify the qualities associated with these particular strands of DNA and what they code for. They code for a particular color or a particular characteristic, and then they do indeed introduce them into the ovum of the. So in the case of the gray wolf, they've got the gray wolf. Um, Ovum, and they introduce, I don't know exactly how they do it, but they introduce the spliced section of DNA into the ovum. So it retains you're essentially transferring new genetic information into an existing ovum from another animal. You know, I believe
Except if you're trying to cure a genetic disease like sickle cell, in which case you take the patient's bone marrow and
yeah.
splice the active sickle cell genes into the bone marrow cells and then put them back into your patient. So there's
Uh,
two different kinds of things going on.
yeah. Yeah, right. I mean, so I think it actually, so you have to get the DNA from let me just think through this. You have to get the DNA from the extinct species, so it's some fragment of it. And then you have to understand what genes produce what sort of traits. Like there are all kinds of things, like there's beak morphology genes in birds, dictate how they're, and then so they take those and they edit them, and then they have to have a relative, like I said, and so you know, they uh, they put into an egg cell, basically, into a cell in the egg. But you have to do other things. You have to remove the nucleus from the egg cell of the living relative. I think, yeah, and then you have to insert the edited nucleus with the modified genome, and then you have to stimulate the egg to start dividing, right? So it happens at the very beginning. And that's similar, in fact, apparently to the way that they cloned Dolly the sheep in 1996. Um, and there actually are artificial uteruses or uteri or whatever the plural is out there. I think they're very experimental, but there's been science fiction like talk of, artificial uteruses for humans and I think they have now at least once successfully, I hate to say they've grown a child in an artificial uterus, at least up to a particular stage. I feel like I read that a year or so ago about how they'd managed to do this and maybe it didn't come to term, but it's really amazing stuff.
Now, are there any laws or maybe it's just ethics that could keep? I'm like, can I do this in my basement if I had the right
You
tool?
could. Yes, you probably could. I think there are no strictures to it because who would it be? Would it be the federal government? What skin do they have in the game? It's a good question. I don't, as far as I know, there are no strictures on, go crazy, make the next two-headed bird. I don't know,
Did
you
you ever
know.
happen to read the Thursday Next novels by Jasper Fjord?
Mm,
All right, it's a imaginary alternate reality in England, and one of the side things there is the main character has a cloned dodo from the genetic engineering home hobby craze. And one of
that's
the things they
funny.
brought back, there's a thing with the little plot thing where they brought back mastodons, but they created a law that as an endangered species they can't be interfered with, and so they would migrate right through people's yards and trample the
It's
countryside
funny.
as they migrate through England.
That's
And
really
a
funny.
little
That's a,
cautionary tale there,
that's
but
a, yeah. I can't help thinking of Stephen King's novel Pet Cemetery. It's so hard. I read that. It was one of the most horrifying things I've ever read. I mean, I really like his writing, but I could not stomach that
Whose
years
quote was
ago.
that at the end that you had put up on the flash screen, splash screen?
What's that?
Whose quote was that you put up on the splash screen at the end about
That was
how
mine. That was
colossal?
a second.
That
That
was
was the
yours.
closing. That was the
Okay.
closing paragraph of my.
Okay. Well,
Oh,
thank you.
Yeah,
That was
no.
sorry.
that.
That
I
was the
wanted to
closing
know.
paragraph of my de-extinction book,
I wanted to know because, as you
of
said,
my
as
de-extinction chapter in the
right,
book.
right. Well, as they said, that stuck the landing. The other
Exactly.
thing is, there was an article that all of you may have heard of where there was this extremely gentle bull. He was amazingly good with kids. He's obviously could be a dangerous animal. He was not. He died of old age, and
Mm.
because people missed him so much, they decided to clone him. And I was at the behest of a company, as usual, who wanted to do it on as a pilot or prototypical basis. They brought the bull back, and it seemed like everything was going well. And then as time went on,
Was it a nice bull? Was it
well,
an I couldn't hear
Not
that.
more
Was it a nice
impressive.
bull?
you mean the second one or the first one?
The second,
Yeah,
The
yeah.
second one
The
was
replacement.
a nice bull. No, it came out as a nice bull. It looked exactly and acted exactly like the older one. And then as
Interesting.
time went
Well,
by,
that's interesting. I mean,
yeah.
because
but finish. I want to
Okay,
hear
I'm
more.
sorry.
behavior is
It's
so
I don't have much
environmental,
left,
you
but
know.
basically, and then you can certainly chime in. But
Either,
basically,
either my internet connection is faltering or someone else's.
can someone hear me?
We can hear you, Thomas.
Okay. So anyway, the end of the story. Hopefully, Dan can hear this. I don't know if it's. Are you able to hear this, Dan? I
And
guess not. Anyway, I guess someone will translate it for him. But the point is that the
Sorry.
bull. Whoop, okay, the bull actually, as time went on, started developing quirks. And it started, doing bizarre things, such as, getting irritated for no reason at all. There was no antecedent to it. No one was trying to irritate it. It would just get irritated. Nothing that the previous bull would do. And the previous bull would actually give uh, kid rides, kids would ride on its back. And despite the fact that it had its horns and everything, no one thought about it because the bull was guaranteed not to do anything. And of course, this one became so unpredictable they couldn't do that anymore. And I think it gored the owner, not fatally, but enough. I mean, I don't know. He must have the heart of stone, but heart of steel. He would give it another chance. It would gore him again, and they had to put it down. But the point is that obviously, this is a cautionary tale, and it didn't happen that long ago. But it's like that old saying, what could possibly go wrong? Well, pretty much everything. So,
Well, exactly. But I'll say that behavior is very driven by environment. So, like, if my dog Juno had been abused before she got to us, she would not be a very good dog, and it wouldn't be about genetics. It'd be about behavior, you know. So,
correct.
uh,
Yeah, it's always nature versus nurture, right? How
yeah,
much
right,
is the basis of what? But yeah, no, but
right.
that's back to looking like something, as you mentioned, is not necessarily going to be something else.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Dan, when I was a kid,
Okay.
the generational bird example for extinction was the California condor, and like throughout like my childhood into my adulthood, it was followed closely, and everybody in school knew about it. And is there a bird that we is on the very brink of extinction right now that is sort of like that has taken over the California condor as
I
sort of
just
like
can't
the,
hear you guys. I don't know why. Can you hear me?
we hear you.
Hear you.
I can only get maybe 20% of what you're saying.
Oh, what's the new California condor? Is there a bird that has taken over as like the example of the bird on the brink of extinction that scientists are doing everything they can, but it doesn't look good, but there is a chance?
Well, so I write about this in the book. So there's a yeah. So it's a Hawaiian bird. It's got a long Hawaiian name. I forget which one it is because they all have long Hawaiian names. What they've started doing is they've started these captive breeding programs before the birds are critically endangered. They started them when there's still several thousand left. And I know a lot about the condor and its captive breeding program. I have a whole thing about it in one of the chapters. I've talked to the two guys that started the program, and I've read and talked a lot about the condor. I think there is a move afoot, and so this Hawaiian bird. Let me see if I can pull up the name of the bird. Um, won't take me but a second to find this here. Um, let's see, where is this? Give me a second here. Um, yeah, the akikiki. And so they've started trying to strategize to protect some of these birds before they're critically endangered. And she said every time she's in a meeting about endangered birds in Hawaii, the first thing they say is, "We should have started this earlier." And so I think the fact that now they're trying to make these sort of advanced moves. The akikiki is actually critically endangered. The one I'm thinking of is there's another species, and I'm not sure I can tell from this, but the whole captive breeding thing has been very successful for different species of birds and less so for others. The Hawaiian crow has been a mixed bag, the alala, Corvus hawaiiensis. But the condor, of course, is the great success story. The real great success story is the peregrine falcon, which was down to very low numbers of a few hundred. Now it's ubiquitous, and so but probably something in Hawaii, if I had to say, there's a ground zero bird that they're trying to resurrect. That's the one I've come across anyway.
Yeah, but isn't the problem in Hawaii that other than at the very high altitudes, the environment's
Yeah.
changed so much and you've got so many invasive species that the chances of them surviving on their own is
Yeah.
low. I don't know, what are they going to do to
Yeah.
create an
Yeah.
environment
Yeah.
that they can survive in if they
That,
can breed them?
that's a bigger problem, Rick. I mean, one of the things that happens in Hawaii is the mosquito vector gets higher and higher as it gets warmer and warmer, and so they're kind of stranded at higher and higher elevations where they've not habituated to finding food up there or breeding up there, and so they're being forced up to higher elevations, and it's a problem. But it's kind of a bigger problem. Okay, I also have to go. I've got to teach at 7 o'clock, so I've got to go. But thank you all
you.
so much.
Thank
It was a
Thank
lot
you
of
very
fun.
much.
Thank you.
And
Yeah.
so this, yeah.
Thank you.
A
Very
lot of fun.
interesting.
A lot of fun talking with you
And
guys.
Dan, I bet it's Colossal that was mucking up your internet connection.
I bet it is. They're on to me. I'm gonna get on my. Gonna use my. Yeah, I'm gonna fight back somehow.
Thank
Okay,
you.
guys. Have a good night.
Good
Nice to
night.
meet you.
Thank you. Great,
With-
great
Take care.
talk.
Thanks so
Evan,
much.
how come
Yeah,
you didn't
no.
even say send in the clones at once?
Ah, I'll say it now. Send in the clones. There you go.
No.
That's
All
very
right,
funny.
with Dan gone, if anyone has any questions about genetic engineering or any sort of that topic, I could answer them.
Correctly or just answer them?
No, absolutely incorrectly. I'm supposed to be going to Arkansas to look for ivory-billed woodpeckers at the end of the month.
Okay.
Ooh.
Hey, if you don't
Uh,
find them, you can make them.
You can
yes,
create
that's what I was going to ask him if we had a few more minutes.
Yeah.
Thank you. I have to go.
Good
Good
night.
night, everyone.
That was
Thanks for recording.
terrific. That was a really
you.
fascinating
Great.
conversation.
Guys, whoever's left, I was getting emails from Andrew O'Toole while we were doing this, a chat on the chat rather. His mom passed away on Sunday, Adrian.
Oh, Adriana?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah,
that's
he was messaging with me.